Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the ISO 9000 and ISO 9001 updates. Both standards have undergone their first revision since 2015, and given the significant milestone for the quality management community, we thought it would be helpful to provide a practical overview of the key changes and why they matter. My name is April McMullen, and I'm the Standards Development Manager for the UK Mirror Committee to ISO TC 176, SC1 and SC2, which are responsible for ISO 9000 and ISO 9001 respectively. And all three of our speakers today have directly contributed to the development of these standards. So before we begin, I did want to quickly go over some housekeeping and mention some of the features of the GoToWebinar. So this is a listen-only online event, so your microphones and cameras will remain switched off, but do feel free to use the reactions button at the bottom left of the screen. We'd really welcome your questions during the webinar today, so please do use the question button at the top right of the screen. You can also zoom into the slides for more detail and take a screenshot using the icons to the right of the slides. We'll do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible, and the experts will be able to address these following the presentations. If you experience any technical issues, please do report these to us through the same question box. And please do keep an eye on the chat box at the top right of the screen for information that's provided throughout the event today. Following completion of the webinar, we'd be grateful if you could take the time to complete a feedback survey, and in a day or two you'll also receive a link to the recording and a copy of the slides. You can also find out more about upcoming BSI events by scanning the QR code that's currently on screen. If I could have the next slide, please. Thanks. So today's session will cover the background to the revisions, the key updates to ISO 9000 and ISO 9001, and what these changes will mean in practice. We'll also look at how the two standards work together, how organisations can prepare for the updates, and also what's coming next for the ISO 9000 family. We've also allocated some time for a live Q&A as well. Just to say that the ISO 9000 and FDIS, or final draft for 9001, are now available to purchase through BSI. And if you do buy the final draft of 9001 as a pre-order, you'll automatically receive a copy of the published standard at no extra cost. We're also really pleased to be able to offer webinar attendees a discounted rate, and I can share that code with you later on. We can move on to the next slide, please. So I'm really pleased to welcome our speakers for today. So firstly, we have Graham Watson, Chair of the UK Mirror Committee to ISO TC 176 SC1 and contributor to the ISO working group responsible for revising ISO 9000. I'd also like to welcome Sam Somerville, who wears many hats. She's the current Chair to the UK Mirror Committee to ISO TC 176 Quality Management and Quality Assurance, Chair of the International Committee ISO TC 176 SC2 Quality Management Systems, and was a convener of the International Working Group responsible for revising ISO 9001. And our third speaker today is Mike Bladen. He's a Deputy Chair to the UK Mirror Committee to ISO TC 176, contributing UK member to the International Working Group responsible for revising ISO 9001, and is the UK lead on the International Working Group looking at the revisions of ISO 9002, guidelines for the application of 9001 and the ISO SME Handbook. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Graham now, who will be able to give some background to the revision.
Thank you, April, and good afternoon, everybody. We thought a useful starting point for this was actually to briefly explain how ISO standards are actually developed. Most people I ask the question, who writes ISO standards, will tell me ISO. I'm pleased to say you couldn't be further wrong. The standards are actually shaped by the people who use them in practice. Experts are nominated by national standard bodies, like BSI, for instance, for the UK, and international liaison organisations. And those experts, being real organisation, bring real organisation experience into the drafting process. The standards actually go through multiple drafts, national consultations, and rounds of comment and voting. What emerges is not the view of one organisation or country, but an internationally agreed consensus. This context is important because the revisions we are talking about today are directly informed by how ISO 9000 and 9001 are actually used in the real world. Next, please. With that context in mind, let's briefly look at why ISO 9000 and 9001 were revised and why that matters to users. That's you, basically. The short version is that users told us there was inconsistency in the way these standards were interpreted. Organizations want clearer intent, and the way organizations operate today has changed significantly since the previous editions were published back in 2015. The revision responds to these reality, not by adding requirements, but by improving clarity and alignment. Next, please. So what are these drivers? In practice, a lot of the change has happened around organizations rather than inside the standards themselves. Supply chains are more volatile, change happens faster and less predictable, and expectations of leadership, trust, and accountability are higher than they were even a decade ago. The revisions reflect this context and aim to make the standards easier to apply in that environment. And I'll pass you over to Sam.
Thanks, Graham. So one consistent message from the global feedback we received was that the requirements themselves were rarely seen as the problem. And this was partly demonstrated by the narrow margin of those who felt that the standards should be revised against those who were very comfortable to keep the requirements as they were. And where organizations struggled, it was more often due to inconsistent interpretation, over-reliance on checklists, for example, and a growing distance between the system and the real organizational value. And it was that feedback that strongly influenced the direction of the revisions. So the revision approach was very deliberate, in fact. The focus was on clarity, alignment, and usability, and only introducing new requirements where user value could be confidently expected. And the intent was to clarify meaning, strengthen alignment between concepts and requirements, support professional judgment, and improve consistency in interpretation and implementation. And a lot of the interpretation challenges we've just described actually come down to language. ISO 9000 provides the common vocabulary and shared understanding that underpin consistent use of ISO 9001. And without that shared language, it's very easy for the same requirement to be understood in many different ways. So why does all of this matter to you as a user? These revisions were directly shaped by user experience, as Graham said. And they focus on the areas where organizations told us that they struggled the most. Clearer intent supports more consistent interpretation. Less tick box thinking helps to shift the focus back to outcomes and value. And stronger alignment then between ISO 9000 and ISO 9001 reduces misunderstanding and places greater emphasis on leadership, and change supports systems that cope better with disruption. So at their core, these revisions are about getting better results from what already works. So I'm going to hand back over to Graham now to give us an overview of ISO 9000 before we come back and look specifically at ISO 9001. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you, Sam. I'm going to try and describe the contents of 9000 2026 and take you through the essential features of the revised standards. I'm actually delighted and very pleased indeed to say that BSEN ISO 9000 2026 has been published. It was published by BSI on the 31st of March. Next, please. The contents. Apologies to those of you who are already familiar with 9000 2015. The contents will look similar, but I know there's quite a few people who possibly have never looked at 9000. So those who know and understand it, please be patient. The standard contains the quality management principles. It contains the fundamentals of quality management. As Sam has already said, it contains the vocabulary of quality management and provides guidance on developing a QMS using those fundamental concepts and principles. The purpose remains unchanged. The aim is to help the user understand those fundamental principles, concepts, and vocabulary to effectively and efficiently implement a QMS and realize the value from the quality management and quality management system standards. There have been changes to the structure and the content, which has been revised. For instance, the order of the clauses has been revised to align with ISO requirements, so the structure of the document will look slightly different to those of you who are familiar with its previous version. It is important to note, however, that ISO 9000 does not set requirements for a quality management system. Those requirements are contained in ISO 9001 and other requirement standards. Next, please. The quality management principles. The quality management principles offer organizations a strong basis for establishing or enhancing their quality management system. They act as essential guidance that applies universally to the QMS of any organization. And although each principle can be considered separately, they are actually interconnected and mutually dependent when implemented within an organization. The changes, well, the principles are, I should read them out to you: customer focus, leadership, engagement of people, process approach, improvement, evidence-based decision-making, relationship management. They're actually the same as they were in 2015, but there have been some minor changes made to the text. For every quality management principle, 9000 gives you a statement outlining this principle, an explanation of its importance to the organization, the key advantages associated with it, and suggested actions organization can take to apply the principle effectively within their own organization. The fundamentals. Here there is quite a change from the 2015 version. They've been substantially revised in this clause. So they've been revised by reintroducing some long-established concepts and also introducing concepts that have become more important and established since 2015. They're presented in these two groups. So fundamental concepts are those that are integral to the understanding of quality management in general. The additional concepts that are relevant to the effective application of quality management within an organization. And as I say, these additional concepts have emerged and grown in relevance since 2015 for a lot of the reasons that we talked about earlier as the reason for change. Please note that this standard is not written as a textbook. It simply provides clearly the characteristics of each of these concepts in a way they apply to quality management. Next, please. And here they are. The fundamental concepts, it's a bigger group than those familiar with the previous version will know. So the fundamental quality management concepts are quality, quality management system, quality assurance, quality control, quality planning, process management, risk-based thinking, organizational quality culture, and continual improvement. They describe essential ideas that define and support the practice of quality management. They also provide an intellectual framework that standards like ISO 9001 can turn into requirements. Next, please. This group is what we call concept relevant quality management. At first look, you might say, well, they're not specifically applicable to quality management, but increasingly they have become essential contributors to an effective quality management system. So they are context of an organization, interested parties, integrated management system, circular economy, emerging technologies, innovation, change management, customer experience, knowledge management, information management, people aspects, and business continuity. Next, please. The document also includes a section giving guidance on developing a quality management system. It actually proposes how a well-planned QMS based on a framework that integrates the principles and the concepts relevant to quality management can help organizations realize their objective. But remember, 9000 doesn't set requirements for QMS. These you'll find in ISO 9001 and other requirement standards. Next, please. The vocabulary, clause 3. It's probably the bit of 9000 that everybody is most familiar with and probably think that ISO 9000 is just about the vocabulary. The vocabulary terms and definitions provide a common language for quality management to facilitate communication and enhance understanding. Sam's already emphasized the importance of understanding, common understanding, because when a term appears in a standard, it has the specific meaning that is provided in ISO 9000. But it's not just applicable to ISO 9001. 9000 contains the terms and definitions that apply to all quality management and quality management system standards developed by ISO TC 176. In total, 173 terms and definitions. They are arranged in conceptual order, but there's also an alphabetical index of the terminological entries. And the reason for this is to help with translation, because ISO standards, as you know, are not just available in English. And if the terms were arranged alphabetically, when they got translated into another language, it wouldn't make any sense at all. The relationship between terms is described in concept diagrams that are in Annex A. So they provide a thematic grouping of the terms, and that's the rationale for the order in which these terms and definitions appear in 9000. There are some new terms and definitions. Things change. Some definitions have been revised. What is important is standards that cite 9000 as a normative reference for their vocabulary. So this is clause 2 of a standard, it's normative references. So although we say that 9000 doesn't actually imply requirements, if 9001, and it does, refers to 9000 as a normative reference, And that means that all of these terms that are in 9000 have that meaning when they're used in 9001. And this is very important for communication. Next, please. So what are the main changes? Here's a summary of the main changes. Well, the obvious one is the title's changed. So it used to be Quality Management Systems, Fundamentals and Vocabulary. It's now Quality Management, Fundamentals and Vocabulary. Subtly, it's dropped the systems because the standard is now addresses an enhanced content. And it has been restructured by moving the quality management principles and fundamentals that were in clause 2, they're now in clause 4. Next set of changes, as I said already, additions have been made to the fundamentals and they've been divided into 2 congruent groups. So fundamental quality management concepts and additional concepts relevant to quality management. Terms and definitions have been added to reflect changes in 20 ISO TC 176 documents, because there hasn't been a revision to 9000 since 2015, and in the interim period other terms have appeared in other TC 176 standards. They're now all in 9000, and the concept diagrams in Annex A, as I say, have been revised to include those additional terms, and that's the big reason why you say, well, why have you changed the number of these terms? That's the reason why. So I think that's the description of 9000, and now over to Sam.
Thanks, Graham. So now I'm going to take you through a focus on ISO 9001 and the key updates in the 2026 revision. We're going to stay at a high level. We're going to concentrate on intent and practical implications rather than walking through the clauses one by one. Thanks. So the most important reassurance is that this is evolution, it's not revolution. The core purpose and scope of ISO 9001 remain unchanged, and the familiar structure has, of course, been retained. And what the revision does, though, is it strengthens clarity of intent and supports more consistent application in practice. If you have a mature, effective ISO 9001 system already, then this revision should feel very recognisable with enhancements, not a radical edit. So the revision brings greater clarity to several areas that users identified, as we said earlier, as challenging. And they reflect where organisations told us that ISO 9001 either wasn't being used well, or it was being interpreted perhaps too narrowly. And these include leadership accountability for quality outcomes, organisational culture and behaviours, clearer distinction between risk mitigation and opportunity pursuit, and managing change as a normal condition rather than as an exception. You'll know that these themes are not new, but the intent is now much clearer, and you'll mainly see those reflected in clauses 5, 6, and 7. There is an emphasis on leadership and new requirements on the promotion of quality culture and ethical behaviour. Quality is positioned more as part of organisational governance, not something that's delegated away from top management. And leadership behaviours are recognised as having a direct influence on the effectiveness of a quality management system and consistency of results. ISO 9001 is now clearer that quality is not something that leadership can just delegate and forget. And this aligns most clearly with clause 5.1 on leadership and commitment, and of course with awareness and engagement expectations later in clause 7. Thanks. So the revision also provides clearer treatment of risk and opportunity. Risks and opportunities are now more explicitly distinguished rather than kind of being treated as two sides of the same coin. And this supports a much better balance between protecting intended results and actively pursuing improvement. So not just avoiding failure, but strengthening performance as well. Risk-based thinking, as you'll know, if you're familiar with ISO 9001, is not new. But opportunity has often been lost in practice, and so these revisions have directly addressed that. And this clarification sits within the planning requirements under clause 6.1. Global feedback also showed us that unmanaged change is one of the biggest causes. Oh, sorry, can we go back? Thank you. Unmanaged change is one of the biggest causes of system failure. Small changes done badly can often cause much more and wider issues than sometimes big changes done well. Change is recognised now, as we've said, as a normal condition for most organisations, and this revision places much greater emphasis on planning communication and role clarity when changes affect the quality management system. And the aim is to reduce those unintended consequences and maintain confidence that intended results can still be achieved. And this aligns directly with clause 6.3 on planning of changes. Next slide then, please. Thanks. So Annex A has a very important role in this revision as one of the most practical, I think, improvements. It provides informative clarification of the intent of the requirements and reinforces flexibility in how systems can be structured based on the organisations that are involved. It doesn't add any requirements, but it supports that proportionate contextual implementation and therefore more consistent outcomes across industries, sectors, and of course, as Graham mentioned, languages. Many organisations, particularly SMEs and newer users, find this especially helpful. And Annex A is there to support correct understanding and that consistent application within the organisations. So what stays the same? It's really, really important to be clear here about what has not changed. We mentioned before the scope and purpose of ISO 9001 remain the same. The process approach and risk-based thinking are retained. Flexibility around documented information remains, and compatibility with integrated management systems with other ISO management systems such as 14001, 45001, 27001, that remains unchanged. And there is, of course, no expectation that any organisation should restructure a system purely to mirror the clause numbering. A process-based system is absolutely the expectation of what will be implemented without having to follow the clause order. So we've looked at ISO 9000 and ISO 9001 separately, but they are designed, as we've discussed and Graham has very eloquently shared with us, they're designed to work together as a single framework. So this next section explains how they connect. And again, as Graham mentioned this before, the practical implication is that shared meaning matters. Conformity to ISO 9001 relies very heavily on the vocabulary defined in ISO 9000. Next slide, please. In practice, we know, of course, that many organisations have used ISO 9001 effectively without ever opening ISO 9000. But that doesn't reduce the importance of this standard's role in shaping meaning, interpretation, and intent. Using that common vocabulary, the common principles, fundamental concepts, reduces variation in how requirements are understood and applied. And inconsistent use of those, including the terms, is a frequent source of confusion and indeed audit disagreement. Graham.
Yes, if we try and express this very simply. If you think of ISO 9001 as providing the rules of the game, ISO 9000 can be considered as the dictionary that defines the language those rules are written in. And the danger is, without a dictionary, different players can read the same rules differently. And I'll add to that, dictionaries can be very helpful, but in my experience, if I want to look up a word as opposed to a term in a dictionary, it gives me a choice. And I usually pick the one that fits the bill the most. But what we've got with the definitions in 9000, that's the meaning that fits quality management as seen by ISO TC 176, and it applies across all of the standards, which is why that alignment is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Graham. So now let's think about how this then translates into value for you, the users. Next slide, please. So this is where the value really becomes visible in practice. Using ISO 9000 and ISO 9001 together creates that common foundation for interpretation of the requirements of ISO 9001. And that reduces misunderstanding, and it makes systems easier to implement with confidence. It also supports better decision making because people are working from the same understanding of those key concepts. And it brings greater consistency as well, not just internally, but with customers, partners, and of course, auditors. And it's that consistency that builds customer confidence because outcomes are more predictable and reliable. And finally, of course, it makes training, auditing, and improvement simpler and more effective. So the key point is that real value comes from using the two standards together, aligning those concepts and the requirements and not treating them separately. Okay, so next we'll give a high-level overview of areas to consider as you think about the updates to ISO 9000 and ISO 9001 and their impact on your quality management system. So when you're preparing for the revision, it's really important that you take a look at how leadership accountability for quality outcomes is demonstrated in practice within your organization. We've talked before about the changes, and you can see here around quality culture. This is where it really, really matters. And this primarily links to clause 5.1. And then consider whether people understand their contribution, those expected behaviours and the consequences of non-conformity. If they understand it, how is that demonstrated? Really, really important to your system. And this aligns with competence and awareness expectations under clause 7. Risk and opportunity we've already talked about. And here it's around checking whether opportunities are considered explicitly, not just risks. Focusing only on risk can limit the effective planning to achieve your intended results, and it misses some really significant benefits that come with having an effective quality management system. And this, as I mentioned before, sits within clause 6.1, actions to address risks and opportunities. And are changes in your organisation planned and communicated well? Do you review those changes and whether or not they were effective? Careful planning, again, as we mentioned earlier, of change reduces potential for unintended issues and non-conformities. So while learning from change supports improvement, and this aligns with clause 6.3. And back again to that shared language and understanding of the fundamentals and concepts that really underpins consistent application and, of course, audit. You'll note actually that the terms and definitions, or some terms and definitions based on the harmonized structure of management system standards, are now held under clause 3 of ISO 9001. And of course, the full ISO 9000 vocabulary and Annex A support this understanding. Thanks. So putting it all together, many organisations will already be doing much of this, if not all of this already. So this revision really is planned to improve clarity, where to focus and how to get more value from those existing practices. It's all good common sense. And now I'm going to pass on to Mike Bladen, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what's coming next for quality management standards.
Hi everyone, and thanks very much, Sam. So what's coming next? So we have the revision of ISO 9002 and the ISO 9001 handbook for small enterprises. Next slide, please. So ISO 9002 is essentially a guidance document that supports the application of 9001. I'm sure many of you have had a chance to read and use it. It's designed to help organizations understand the intent and apply 9001 requirements in a practical way and take into account their context and maturity. So the key point with 9002 is gives guidance, but it doesn't introduce any new requirements. It simply supports the understanding and consistent application of the ISO 9001 requirements. So if your organization is asking how do we apply these requirements in a way that fits our context, ISO 9002 is intended to be one of the main supporting resources. Just so you know that the DIS is actually open for ballot for 9002 next week, and I think the events team are going to help provide the post to the standards development portal, so you can link to this and provide comments on the ballot. It's currently in revision, and the expected publication of ISO 9002 is 2027. Next slide, please. So what's also in revision is the ISO 9001 handbook for small enterprises. It's a guidance document that supports the application of 9001. Thank you. It's designed to help organizations understand the intent and apply 9001 in a practical way, and it is specifically focused on small organizations. Again, does not introduce new requirements, simply supports understanding and consistent application of 9001. It's particularly helpful for organizations that want a quality management system that's effective without unnecessary complexity. Again, it's support material, and it's going to be published in 2027, just after 9002. That's it. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much to all three of our speakers for their presentations just now. We're actually running quite early in terms of timings, so happy to have a slightly longer Q&A session. We've had some really good questions come through. Let me just have a look. And I'd encourage you to continue typing your questions out now. Just a reminder that you can submit questions using the question button at the top right hand of the screen. I also wanted to flag that speakers won't be able to comment extensively on questions related to training or certification, as these areas fall outside the scope of standards development. But if you did have any questions related to other areas, such as the key changes or the revision process, please do let us know. We also had a number of questions that were submitted in advance around the changes to ISO 9001, which Sam has been able to cover in her presentation just now. But if there was anything that you'd like further clarification on, please do put it in the questions box. A couple of questions coming in around the publication date for ISO 9001 as well. So the full standard is expected to publish in September 2026, though we don't have an exact date for this just yet. You will have also heard us referring to ISO TC 176 throughout the webinar, and apologies we didn't clarify this, but ISO TC 176 is the official technical committee of the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO for short, responsible for developing and maintaining the quality management and quality assurance standards. So thank you to the person who submitted that question. A question has come through for Graham on ISO 9000. Is it still worth getting a copy of 9000 when all the definitions are available on the ISO online browsing platform?
Well, I'm very pleased that somebody knows that the definitions are available on the ISO online development platform. But I hope in the questions, in our presentations, we've managed to show how important it is to get these two standards working together. Of course, you don't need the definitions, really. If you just have the definitions, you're missing the bit that I really wanted to emphasize is the whole basis for ISO's approach to quality management. It's based on principles. You get those in 9000. It's based on concepts that are then turned into requirements or used. So I think collectively, the package is all about understanding, and the relationship, the conceptual relationship between the terms and definitions is almost as important as the terms themselves, because within any organization, you can call things what you want. Nobody really matters. Nobody really cares what you call things in your organization, and most people will have their own pet words. The difficulty arises when you want to speak to other people about that topic, because they want to understand the shorthand language that you're using. They won't understand your jargon. They won't get the context of where it all fits in. So that's why I think it is important to get the bigger picture. But 173 definitions, was it? It's a lot. You need. I find it useful to see everything in one package. That with the principles and the concepts helps better understanding. Of course, you don't need any of those, but it will enhance your management system if you, anybody working in the organization, your customers to a degree, and your suppliers understand where you're coming from. And that comes from looking at the whole thing combined.
Thank you so much, Graham. A couple of questions around the transition period for organizations to migrate their quality management system to the new edition of ISO 9001. And I'm afraid we can't comment on this just yet, as the formal guidance is still to follow from the global ACI, which is Global Accreditation Cooperation Incorporated. We have had some questions around the impact that the 9001 changes might have on organizations. Happy for all three speakers to come in for this question. What do you think are the kinds of challenges that organizations will face with these latest updates?
Well, I don't mind starting with that one, and I'm sure that Mike and Graham might have their own views to share as well. But actually, in general, there shouldn't be huge challenges with this revision, because as we've mentioned before, really what it's doing is it's clarifying, it's really supporting understanding for concepts, for the requirements that are already there. So, really the challenge, if you like, then is making the system work for you through behaviors and decisions that are made within your organization. It's not just about updating documentation. It's a fantastic opportunity to rethink where you are. We're all focused on continual improvement. So it stands to reason that we continually improve the standards and requirements that we work to. I'm not sure that really helped. I hope that there won't be significant challenges. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. Just a couple of other questions. Did you have any specific advice for new users of these standards?
Mike, do you want to take that one?
Yes, that's fine. I would say if you're new to it, definitely buy both 9000 and 9001. Do not just buy the requirement standard and think you can progress through without it. It's a normative reference. It is absolutely vital you really understand the concepts behind it, the thought into it, the principles before you embark. If you're new to it, I would absolutely recommend buying the guidance that's available through ISO 9002, or if you're a small enterprise looking at the SME handbook. These are published for a reason, they exist for a reason. It is to help you understand what you've got to do and then take an effective approach to it, so you don't make too many mistakes along the way. Everybody will, but it's to help you. So please consider the suite of the 9000, 9001, and 9002 and the supporting documents when you embark on your implementation or even your improvement of your quality management system.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to add to that, because, you know, sometimes when I look on LinkedIn and I see some comments that say, you know, you should only even look at clauses 4 to 10 of ISO 9001. And that's such a shame, because there is so much useful information, especially as I mentioned before. We now have this Annex A, which has all of this amazing useful information to clarify the requirements and help you to understand how they could apply within your organization. So, you know, to anybody who's starting new, absolutely, I'll mirror what Mike said. Look at all this information that's available in ISO 9000, 9001, 9002, and the SME handbook, and really think about it from a common sense perspective. I know it's written in ISO language because, you know, as Graham talked about earlier, it has to be internationally available in many languages. And, you know, as part of that, there needs to be this, again, shared understanding. But when you take it down to just business sense, it's absolutely makes perfect sense and will help you to have not only a good quality management system, but a good and effective organization. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sam. We've had a couple of questions come through around the culture aspect of 9001. Just see if I can find it again.
Can I help? There was one that said, how is it clear to demonstrate quality culture?
That's the one. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Sam.
Perfect. Yes. Okay. Well, so I think I'm not going to give you answers here, because it will very much depend on your organization and the auditor and all of those kind of things. But a really useful, hopefully, clarification is that what the revision does is it makes it clearer how culture is reflected through leadership, behaviours, awareness and decision making. So when you're internally auditing, or hopefully the external auditors also, will be focusing on observable evidence. How does leadership demonstrate accountability for quality outcomes, for example? How are expected behaviours communicated and reinforced? How do people understand their role and how do they act in practice? And also, how then does the organisation respond when things go wrong? All of these reflect quality culture. And so that means that quality culture becomes visible through how the management system operates in reality, rather than through a separate culture assessment. So really think about it in terms of the management system. And I think that then will make things a lot clearer for you internally, and of course, when it comes to evidencing that. I hope that helps.
If I could add something here, I think culture becomes evident when you compare organizations, and there's a whole load in 9000 about suppliers, providers, supply chains. And if you're procuring something from a supplier, you expect it to be done in a certain way. That's part of the culture. A lot of difficulties occur when that culture isn't transparent through the supply chain, and you go, oh, I wasn't expecting that, but you didn't specify it in the contract. But it's an expectation. That's what I need, my requirement. And culturally, it's difficult to make assumptions about what you expect. And the other big thing is internationally, there is such a thing as national culture. Certain things go on in certain states that don't happen in the UK, let's say, for instance, and vice versa. So understanding the culture of people who are doing the work, which is actually reflected in the organization's management system, is quite important. I agree, it's very difficult to measure, but I think generally, you know, when the culture is bad, it's when mistakes start to happen.
That's great. Thank you so much. Just a question on the revision process. Were there any major pain points, different perspectives, obviously, on what needed to be done? And are you able to share some information around what took place?
Well, no, I mean, I think it's always a very challenging project to run. You know, especially I think with ISO 9001, because you've got a very well-known, very mature standard, and you have people with very different views, because I'm sure all of the people on this call today have very different experiences actually of how quality management shows itself within different organizations, both their current one and previous ones. So when you take that globally, and we have over 100 participants in the revision, all from different countries, different backgrounds, different sectors, different industries, that's a challenge to bring those all together into something that we can all agree on, that we can reach consensus on. However, what I will say is that that's also the benefit. It's absolutely fantastic to have such diverse views and to be able to bring them in and to find a solution that actually meets them in the most efficient and effective way, so that the breadth of our users of ISO 9001 can feel that their voices have been heard as part of this revision. And so, you know, around items such as risk and opportunity, whether that should be split, you know, we have many and in-depth conversations around that. The same with culture and ethical behaviors, and of course around change. Those discussions have really formed, I think, strong improvements to the revised standards that I believe will go on to help organizations be better over the coming years as they implement it. Thanks. I'll be interested to hear some other views, maybe from Mike and Graham. Thanks.
Okay,
sorry.
I was waiting
Go,
for
Graham. I was waiting for Graham.
I think it depends on, to a degree, how controversial the topic is. One of the strengths of the ISO method is actually consensus. It doesn't mean that you agree, but you all have a chance to argue your case. And it's a bit like wearing away those until they eventually give up. And I don't mean that in a nasty way. Some people will still hold views, even though the majority view in the room or on the online meeting is a particular way. That's perfectly right. And sometimes it's that persistent challenge that makes you have a rethink about long established views. And the challenge is not necessarily a painful thing. It actually can be very constructive. I've been in several meetings where somebody said something and I thought, you know what, I've never thought of it that way. I wonder how many other people in the room or on the online meeting are having a similar thought that really challenges fundamentally held views. But, you know, we usually end up good friends in the end. And hopefully you see that in the published work. But yeah, challenge is, nobody likes being told they're not doing things properly or they've got it wrong, but actually having that challenge makes you have a refreshing think on, oh, were we really right? Sometimes things were right, but the world has moved on and you have to look at particular circumstances in a completely different way. And that's where sort of fresh blood into a meeting gives you that challenge. It's quite constructive, as Sam alluded to.
Yeah, and also, sorry, I'll let Mike speak in a minute. Sorry, Mike. But also, I think that's a really good attitude to take then into how you apply these revised standards into your own system. You know, really think about things from a fresh perspective. I've learned so much, I know, through this process, having that opportunity to sit back and hear someone else explain a requirement in a way that I've never considered, as Graham just said. So, you know, I would suggest to you all that you look at these requirements with those fresh eyes and as you look to apply them into your system. Sorry, Mike, I know he's got the joys of this to come with the revision of 9002 and the SME handbook.
Absolutely. So thanks. So I'd certainly echo what you say. It's very good for the group to get together and really talk through what needs to be changed, what's the right thing to do to improve the standard. I think also what's really important is, as things change, new tools and technologies evolve, and that's great for a discussion, but also, does it fundamentally change the requirement of what you need to do? And I think one of the key things, particularly in 9001, is making sure that the requirement is largely agnostic of the tools that you would use, and sets out that there's something you should do. How you do it is up to you as an organization. And so there's definitely some robust conversations around whether to introduce certain tools, mention certain technologies which are becoming much more prevalent now around, say, AI, and whether that actually should be included within the international standard or not. And I think largely no was the general consensus, because actually the requirements remains the same. How you handle that is entirely up to you and the tools that you use. So I think it's really important that everybody understands that these discussions, and there were many robust discussions around this type of thing, do take place. And although you may not see that reflected within the standard, it doesn't mean that those discussions are not had on the international forum. So there is a lot of work that goes into arriving at a sensible consensus conclusion that you don't see, but these discussions are had. So I think, yeah, we really, there's a lot that we need to be thankful for the standards makers and those who came to the group, just for the effort and the time and the really good discussions that they had to create the revision. So I would thank them, and thank you to Sam for chairing it. Convening it.
Thanks so much. Question, probably one for Graham. Could you expand on what has specifically changed with the explanations on the principles? And could you also explain the logic behind the choice of choosing the fundamental concepts?
Well, I could provide you with a blow-by-blow account of the changes to the principles. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me, but it is something that we published within QS1 in BSI, so it is available. If I presume we can share that with the questionnaire. And the second part of the question was,
could you explain the logic behind the choice of choosing the fundamental concepts?
We had a look at, obviously the starting point was 2015, but the challenge was fundamental means fundamental. So we also looked back in history at the previous editions of 9000 as to what was in those editions labeled as fundamentals. And there were several, like quality assurance and quality control. And we thought, well, if they were fundamental back in those days, are they not still fundamental? I know there's a lot of people who have quality assurance in their job title, and quality assurance is what it's all about, and quality control is what it's all about. So we thought, well, let's reintroduce those and bring them slightly up to date. Some new ones, it's a moving change in the world at the moment. So those topics were considered. There's also within ISO Technical Committee 176 a working group whose job it is to look to the future, look to the current, look beyond the published standards about what's happening and what concepts are actually organizations are dealing with in real life. And we were asked to look at those and bring, we wouldn't say more relevant, they're all relevant, but ones that were more commonly applicable, and those came into 9000 as well. And that was the main reason we divided the fundamentals into the two parts, to distinguish between those concepts that we considered to be fundamental for quality management and those additional ones which actually any organization within their quality management system could be, probably was, or perhaps should consider doing. So those were brought into the new subclause. And again, the source for most of those is this other working group within TC 176. Its title changed. It was future concepts, but it was considered they weren't really future, they were happening now. But that work is actually still going on. So whenever time comes to revise 9000, 9001, there's sort of feed corn out there ready to be picked on. I know, for instance, I think AI is one of the topics they're currently mulling over.
On AI, actually, a question has come in around was there discussion within TC 176 around potentially placing more emphasis or requirements in the new version of 9001 related to just the rapid global proliferation of AI, robotics, other forms of automation of infrastructure and data information management systems and applications.
Yeah. Absolutely. There were huge discussions, as I think Mike alluded to earlier, because it is such a big challenge for many organizations around the world now. And it's such a changing landscape as well, that trying to keep up with that. And so actually the discussions were that it is such a changing landscape, but it's a tool. At the crux of it is that ISO 9001 is requirements. It tells you what to do. It doesn't tell you how to do it. And ultimately, people are using AI, other technologies, for instance, to support their quality management system. Some people are using it actually to manage their quality management within their organization, but they are tools in order to achieve the what. It's how you achieve the what. So it really, it doesn't have a place as such in ISO 9001. And it's very much then it falls into the area of 9002, where they're really deeply considering, okay, well, how do we address, for instance, organizations who are using AI or other technology for their quality management specifically, as well as obviously for their operations, which is the majority of companies these days. Even coffee shops will have their apps and things that might be AI based. So for 9001, yes, we did have those discussions, and no, because it's all about the requirements, because it's all about the what, not the how, it isn't specifically referenced other than talking about new technologies, and how you achieve them. But I'm going to pass on to Mike, because as I said, that is very much where those conversations are having much more impact.
Well, thanks, Sam. So while the conversations are occurring, it's still a tool, and we've got to be very careful that in any guidance we don't lean too far into any tools or technologies. So even within 9002 and the small business handbook, it's not going to be filled with how you use AI to essentially meet the requirements or apply the requirements. So I would say, if you're looking for a handbook on how AI helps you, it won't be 9002. It's my handbook, and it shouldn't be either, because it needs to be applicable for others, and we need to make sure that the guidance given, it's the widest number of people and is applicable to a large group. But I would certainly echo what you said, Sam, is 9001 was not the place for it, but there were lots of discussions. Yes.
Yes, and I guess we should reference here also, for instance, I might have got the number wrong, but I think it's 42001. There is actually a management system standard for AI. So if you're really interested and want to look at that and how it is applied within your organization, I would very much suggest that you take a look. And you know, even for those of you who attended the BSI conference the other week, for instance, we had a representative there who was talking about quantum. So although AI is very big, it's enormous at the moment, there are other new technologies, emerging things that are coming fast to take its place. So another reason really why we have to be cautious about how we reference that within our quality management standards. Thanks.
Sure, thank you for that. And would you say AI would that have been one of the more debated topics within TC 176, or were there any other debated changes that made it or didn't make it into the standard?
Well, there were so many, and of course sustainability also was a huge topic. You know, as you know, we had the amendment regarding climate change that was introduced into clause 4 back in 2024, and that is now a formal part of the revision. But we had many participants on both sides, some who felt that actually this isn't at all relevant to quality management, and others who were saying, why are we only talking about climate change? We should be talking about the broader sustainability piece. And, you know, we should be bringing that into more and more of the requirements. So arguably you could say, you know, that falls under culture and ethical behavior for some organizations where it's particularly relevant. So huge debates, risk and opportunity, as I said before, that culture piece also. You know, we really did cover pretty much everything. As I said, we had over 100 representatives of NSBs and liaison organizations who really wanted to be heard. And we listened to many different views, different industries as well. For instance, I don't know, I'm thinking nuclear, medical. We had representatives from all of those really feeding into making this revision as good as it possibly could be, and making it as relevant for as many people as possible.
Thanks, Sam. Another question here, what are the top changes organisations underestimate, and how can we start preparing now to avoid a reactive transition?
Oh, Mike, I'll let you take that one.
Well, what do they underestimate? I mean, it's as Sam said earlier, this is evolution, not a revolution. So there aren't a huge number of changes in here. But I think the biggest thing is probably making sure that people understand within the organization what it means to them. And I would say when we're talking about internal auditing, that's probably one of the challenges, because, and I think there's a couple of questions on it, is that somebody has to do the internal audit for the new requirements. So making sure everybody understands what it means and what it means to them takes more time. If you just come out with a new set of new requirements, run out the quality team to do the internal audits or things, you often end up with people being caught on the hop, not knowing, and that's a failure in communication. And that also stems from, you know, leadership not really looking at their own new requirements or what they should be doing, particularly around quality culture, ethical behavior, any changes to risk and opportunity. So it really does start at the top, and it does take time to make sure that the leadership really understand what it means to them, what it is they should be doing, what changes for them, and then I think from that point it can be a really sensible rollout with some communications, and then it feeds into the auditing. The danger is to just get going with the audits and not actually bring everybody along the journey, and that's probably one element of quality culture that's quite perhaps not firing in the way it should. So yeah, I think that's the thing, taking time with the leadership, taking time to communicate with everybody about the changes, what it means to them, and then making sure when you do finally come around to actually do the checks and balances, you're in a good position.
Yeah, and don't just look at changing your documentation. I would say
Yeah,
that is a key
definitely.
area where people are like, oh, I've got to change my system. I've got to write a new process, or I've got to change the documentation as the starting point. We mentioned earlier, stop and take that step back. Really rethink the requirements and how they apply in your organization, how they present themselves day to day. As Mike just said, before you get to the audit, take a proper look yourselves within your teams, within your working groups, within your day-to-day activities, even as an individual, and look at that first before you worry about whether or not you've updated any documentation to reflect it.
Thanks so much. One for Mike. Are you anticipating major changes in the revisions of ISO 9002 in the SME handbook?
So 9002 has undergone quite a number of changes, which has been run under Working Group 30 of ISO T76, TC176, SC2 Working Group 30. There are many working groups. And there's a couple of key things which have been brought into 9002, which were not necessarily missing, but there perhaps weren't as many of them. So some more examples, worked examples, to try and give people a bit more idea of how something may have worked in an organization, mini case studies. Also cautions. What the team have introduced is some practical cautions based on own learning, which we think would help users to apply better and also avoid some of the pitfalls that perhaps we've all been through in the past. So there's also, I think the document is going to be longer because it incorporates these, and there's been some changes to make it clearer on which elements of requirements versus perhaps shoulds and recommendations. Was one of the criticisms of the 9002 previously, that the word should was used a lot, but actually it's not particularly helpful if there's a real requirement in 9001 and it's perhaps masked as a optional way to work. So yes, there's been some changes. Some are for clarity, others are to improve user understanding, give more examples, bring some cautions, and improve the general understanding. Again, you'll have an opportunity to comment on it, and any comments are gratefully received back to improve it. And again, it's all part and parcel of improving this guidance standard overall. And obviously it needs to take into account the changes from 9001. So that is new content that will be within 9002 and the handbook.
Thanks, Mike. And there was a question around what is DIS. I could probably take that one. So during the standards development process, DIS, or Draft International Standard stage, is when the draft opens up to public consultation. It's also an opportunity for members of the National Technical Committee to comment on the standard as well. And BSI does have a dedicated portal that will publish the DIS of 9002 when it opens next week. And I can touch more on that later in one of my slides, but yes, there is a lot of acronyms in standards development. Yeah.
So April, just before, what I would say just to support that is, please do comment on the draft standards. Please comment. It is very, very difficult to get an idea of what the whole of the UK wants from a standard. We endeavour to work with different parties, different people from different organisations when we pull these thoughts together, and then the different countries come together, different national standards bodies. However, if you've got comments, please do put them in. It's really important that we arrive with something that works for everybody, and so your comments are really valuable. So please do comment.
And that feeds back very much, I think, to Graham's comments earlier about who writes standards. The people who put their hand up and say, hey, I have something to say about this, and you know, they get involved, and we're always looking for new people, for new voices to share their experiences and help us to make better standards. So if you want to get involved, please do.
Still getting lots of questions coming in. Another one here, are there any elements that are new to the standard that you think could trip up an existing fully compliant 9001 system?
Actually, no, I don't think so. I think my view is, I think if you're already meeting the requirements and your quality management system is actually effective and efficient and doing what it's meant to be doing, meeting your quality objectives, and I think the changes are largely minimal. You obviously need to look at them, you know, and say, well, how might I do that, and how am I going to do that? And I think that's a big part around the quality culture. If you take the view and say, well, as an organization, we need to understand how are we going to address that requirement, then you can set that down, agree it, and then you can audit against it. So I don't think it's going to trip up a mature QMS. I think it's just an evolution of it. If you're new to it, then everything's challenging. So it depends where you are on the spectrum of implementing a quality management system. But no, I don't think it's a significant one.
And I think also how you have implemented your quality management system. If you've had a minimal view and a kind of tick box approach, then there might well be something that will trip you up. Not significantly, because as Mike said, mostly it's all about clarification and actually improving, trying to move away actually from that tick box approach where it is literally, this is what I have to do as the bare minimum to achieve this requirement, rather than thinking about it more holistically around how do we effectively manage quality within our organization. But yeah, absolutely agree with Mike. In a really good and effective management system, quality management system, it shouldn't be significant.
If I can say something, hopefully not meant to be controversial, and if it is, apologies, but Sam touched on change management earlier, and I'm going to mention context of the organization. Current context up until the publication of the 2016 edition is that's the standard you're working to. So the context after publication, it's changed. So if your organization is already acute at dealing with changes in the context, and it's good at managing change, you'll just gobble this all up. So if those two processes are really slick already, this will be like water off a duck's back. You'll be able to cope with it. And so I think a change to the requirements, if indeed there are any, how you see them, how you see those changes, will really test how good you are as an organization at staying in the right context and also dealing with any change necessary to move you on.
Yeah, absolutely, Graham. And I will say then, look at clause 6.3. We do have 3 kind of new requirements. They were implied before. They are more reinforced, I would say, requirements. Communication of changes, looking at how the effectiveness of those changes are going to be monitored and evaluated, and then how the results of those changes will be reviewed. Take a look. You should have already been doing it before, arguably, in my humble opinion, but it might be something, as I said, if you haven't really looked in depth, if you haven't considered all of the other resources that are available to you, then you might find that you have quite a different looking system afterwards, certainly a more effective system afterwards, I would say.
Probably a question for Mike. Do the new standards accommodate, I'm guessing the 9002 and ISO SME handbook, smaller micro businesses? Are they relevant to one-person organizations?
Yes. So we you should be able to, or you can absolutely implement 9001 for a one-person organization, to the organization, not the individual, and you can certificate against it. Some of the challenges, and that is absolutely where we want to go and make that clear within the Small Businesses Handbook. Absolutely, it's alluded to within 9002 because that should be applicable to everybody, but on that one specifically, it's going to address exactly that kind of organization, small and micro. One of the things that's challenging with a single person organization, internal audit is a little bit difficult because you're typically auditing your own work, and that's quite a challenge. But that can be dealt with by looking to have someone else come and help audit for you. Somebody external, even potentially even if there's a supply chain or a partner that you're working with from an organization. So there are means and ways to overcome these things, but it is more challenging often as an individual rather than a slightly larger organization. Hopefully the culture side of things should be relatively simple for you to deal with because it's just you, but again, you probably do need to even rely even more on feedback from suppliers and from other people that you work with, or even providers, to understand whether you're hitting the mark and whether you're actually doing what you say you're going to be doing. It's very difficult to review things yourself. So yes, absolutely, one person organizations, yes, it will hit on that, and it will give some advice on how that can be done on certain areas.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask if you had any closing thoughts just before we move on to final slides. So thank you very much for taking the time to answer these extra questions. It's been great. Maybe if we start, go on.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say ISO Smart is coming. I don't know how many people who are attending this webinar have heard about it, but in effect, it's digitally enabled standards. And we are hoping that ISO 9001 will be launched in that format when it's launched in September of this year. So I can't give you much more information on it at this time, but watch this space. It is something that I believe will be incredibly helpful to users to support just having another way to access standards as we progress. So really very excited about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. Mike and Graham, any final thoughts?
The only thing I would say is please do comment on the standards which are still working through. 9002, which is open imminently, please do comment back on that. The small handbook takes a slightly different approach because it doesn't work through the same workflows as the standards, but some of the viewpoints that are taken from 9002 will influence some of the considerations and what we do with the Small Businesses Handbook. If something's not clear to users in 9002, or there's some good suggestions, then we can take that into looking at the SME Handbook, because both of those are within the same working group 30. They're two different project leads, but within it there's a lot of joined up thinking in there. So please do comments. That will help enormously with shaping it.
Thanks so much. Graham?
I would say don't be afraid, embrace any change with enthusiasm, because it's all about improvement, or hopefully it is all. That's the intention anyway. And with specific regard to ISO 9000, if you're reading any ISO quality management standard, and I think there's about 22 of them that reference ISO 9000 as a normative reference. If you look in the text, don't think, oh, I know what that means, because if it's a term, it has a specific meaning that's in 9000. So some of the standards will have a clause 3, like ISO 9001 does. There's 20 terms that are listed in there. They come from the high-level structure ISO imposed on quality management system standards. But there's probably, if the 2015 version is anything to go for, there's in excess of another 70 or 60 terms used in 9001, which aren't listed in the clause 3 of 9001. You'll find those in 9000. So don't think, oh, I know what that means, because what you have to appreciate is that the meaning they were used by the writers of the standard were based on, or are actually, the meanings that are in 9000, not what you may think they are. But so if you really want to understand the requirements more accurately, don't dismiss understanding the sort of what I'll call the dictionary of 9001. It's a bit of a pain. I know Sam's already talking about ISO Smart. I did see an early development version where every single term that appeared in the standard was highlighted. You just hovered over it with your mouse and up popped the definition. I'm not quite sure that's coming to fruition just yet, but that would be wonderful.
Thank you so much. I think the announcement around SMART is still to follow from ISO, so I think we'll have to keep watching the space. But thank you once again to Graham, Sam and Mike for your excellent presentations and sharing your insights. And thank you very much to everyone for your engagement throughout the session. You've asked us some great questions. Hopefully you'll be leaving with a clearer understanding of what the changes to both of these standards will mean for you. If we could just quickly move on to the last couple of slides on links and resources. Next slide, please. Just while that's coming up on screen, so as mentioned earlier, copies of the ISO 9000 and pre-orders of ISO FDIS 9001 are available to purchase from BSI. So as with all pre-orders, you will get a copy of the published standard once it's out at no extra cost, and you can find the link to the shop. Hopefully the slide will come up soon, along with some QR codes. And I did mention as well, BSI would also like to offer webinar attendees a special discount of 10% off the standards. So there is a discount code that's available on the screen there, hopefully very soon. I think we might be having some tech issues, really sorry about this. But just to note, the code is only available for the next 48 hours. I did have another, there we go, thank you very much. So I'll just leave that on screen for a few more seconds if people wanted to take screenshots. If we could just quickly move on to the next slide. There were a couple more resources that we wanted to share with you all. So just while that's coming up, Graham has authored the executive briefing for BSEN ISO 9000 2026, which is available for download free of charge. You should be able to see that link in the next slide. BSI has also developed a landing page for ISO 9001, which will continue to be updated with the latest news and guidance throughout the year. And lastly, I just encourage you all to join both the UK Quality Management and the ISO Quality Management groups on LinkedIn. The link should be coming up very shortly. There are a lot of members on the standards development community on there already, and it's just another way you can stay up to date regarding the standards you've heard about today, and where we'll be signposting the links to the public consultation pages again once they're available. So I think there might be a delay in terms of moving the slides. There we go. So if today's session has inspired you to get involved in standards development, we'd love to hear from you. So like our speakers today, you too can become a standards maker through your national standards body, and that will be BSI for those of you who are based in the UK. And just simply follow the QR code on the screen there to find out more. Finally, I just wanted to highlight the BSI's Young Professionals Network. So this is a growing community of early career professionals, and the aim is to bring in more young voices into standards development. And there are all sorts of events that take place throughout the year and provide opportunities for networking and ongoing career development. If you would like to get involved or know anyone who might, please do scan the QR code on screen to find out more and consider signing up. And that brings us to the end of our session today. Thank you very much once again to our speakers, Graham Watson, Sam Somerville and Mike Bladen, for their valuable contributions. And thank you again to everyone for attending and taking part. We hope you found the session useful. Thank you.